This is our panel saw that we use at work. See, it's a safety speed cut. I'll turn this here so you can see. H4 model. The problem that we have had with this saw for the first time is with the what's called the counterbalance, which is this box up here. The price to replace it be anywhere from $270, $300. I saw some $500 and $600 prices, and in fact they are made to not be repaired. There's actually a warning right on here, and it says, "Caution, this counterbalance is pre-wound and under tension. Do not attempt to disassemble or repair this device. Handle with care." And then there we have the information for replacement of this. They tell you it's part PS12 counterbalance and a Colorite safety speed cut out of Ham Lake, Minnesota. So let's go inside and I'll show you the guts to this thing. Here we are at the work table, and this is the spring. As best I can measure, it's about 15 feet of spring. Of course, here's our box that I just got done showing you. This is what's inside of this box in here like this, and it's got a couple bearings there. It has a shaft, and there's this component here, and I had to replace the bolt in it. And we have our counter torque piece. So unfortunately, when I took this apart, I honestly did not expect to take it apart in such a way that it could go back together. I'd just basically destroy it. But I did figure it out. And so I'm going to show you that. I got to get this bolt unscrewed. I'm replacing the original bolt that was in there with a grade 8 1/4x20. The portion from under the head out to the tip measures 1.5 inches. The original bolt that was on there is this one. It was actually sheared in half. You can see that there. So I've got a replacement. Also, the center of this has this Delrin or a plastic bushing that broke in 1,000,000 pieces. So I taped it up and had a local machine shop make me a replacement part out of steel. So here's what they made for me. The replacement bushing. And how this whole shebang goes together. This pin here goes through there. Goes in there like that. And that's what goes into the box. But there's a very, very specific way how this all comes apart and goes together, and I'm going to do my best to document it. Now, they're concerned about the spring tension in there. As I read you on the warning part of the video, it says, there it is, "Do not attempt to disassemble or repair this device. Handle with care." And these springs are very powerful. They can cut your finger clear off. And the cable that goes around this whole shebang, if that grabs and yanks your finger, you're really dealing with some serious tension. Me working on doing rewind springs on lawnmower engines, to me it's just another spring. This is the counter torque arm, and inside this box is a place where it bolts up. It's this hole right there. And that lines up, and of course down inside of there the arm kind of lines up where that axle goes. Anyways, you put that in there, and you know, I didn't show you, I got to show you. See how there's a slot cut in that shaft? And that slot allows this counter torque piece to lock down and prevent that piece from coming undone. That's what locks in your spring. And so you can torque against it. See how that slides there in that slot? So that allows you to turn on the spring when you're in that position, and when you're ready to lock it in, you slide it in there. And our bushing is inside there too. But in order to get it apart, the very first thing is to remove this shoe. It's on there like that. Your cable comes out of here. Well, this is actually crimped on. And if you look right there, there's a little tab there and there, and I have to pry those back. And I'm just going to crimp them back on with a vice grip when I'm done. So for now I don't need that. I've since cleaned up the spring because it looked like it was lithium grease that was on there originally, and it was just absolutely caked in sawdust. And there's some wear on it and everything too from just years of being used. But the spring looks to be in really good shape. I've gone over it with some mineral spirits and cleaned it up as best I can. Let's turn our attention to this wheel that goes inside. All this is two pieces of metal with bearings in it, and then these little pieces are tack welded on there. So once you get the box apart, you make sure all the spring tension is relieved and everything, you're left wondering, how the heck do you get into the thing? Well, if you see right here, there's a couple marks, and I highly recommend that you take so many pictures that you're sick of it as you're going through this thing, because you're going to need them for reference points when you put it all back. I just remember that when I worked on this torque arm was over on that side of the box, because I was working on it here on the bench, and I remember working on the far side of the box. There's a hole over here too. I suppose you could flip the pin over and hook onto that, but since it came apart that way, that's how it's going to go back together. Anyways, inside here, these bearings are pressed in here. You want to be very careful. If you clamp this in a vise, you don't overdo, because you can squeeze this shut and bend these and warp them. You could very carefully pound the bearings out and replace them. I'm not going to, because my bearings that are on here are okay. Now, it doesn't seem like they're really wore out, but I don't know if it'll show up here on the camera. Inside there, it actually says Freeway, Cleveland, Ohio. So it must be Freeway Bearing Company or something like that. Okay, now getting back to the spring, how I finally figured out you have to get the spring out of this. I've marked where it was at, and if you notice, see how this one's got a curve to it right here, but this one's been bowed up right here. Well, when that spring, let's see, I showed it like this, but the spring hooks right on here at the very end, and that's this part right there. If you can envision me taking that up, so that tells me that the spring goes in and it feeds like this around there, and it hooks to the center. So that is in fact how you have to wind it up on this. It feeds in this way, and then you pound that down because your cables lay in this. That forms a trough that your cable rides on. But anyways, when I went to take this thing apart, I took a chisel. In fact, I think I've got it over here. Yeah, it was probably that one. And I was able to get that chisel under there and pry up, and then come around into this part of the spring right there and pound on that and pound, and actually drove it out to about right there. Once I did that, I took the screwdriver and hooked it in the end of the spring like this. Working one-handed, I hate that. I gotta get me a camera stand. Anyways, I hooked the screwdriver in there like that, and using both hands, I was able to pull and extract that string out, or extract the spring from this wheel. And once I got to the end, then it became apparent down in there that this pin was inside there with this bushing, and then the other end of the spring right here was just bolted to the center. Now you have to kind of think backwards, because as you're pushing the saw down, it's winding the spring up, and then as you release the saw, then the spring is basically unwinding. Put this in the vise, and I'm going to clamp right at the bottom of the unit, and not too hard, because if I clamp up here, then it'll crunch the sides in, and I don't want that. So we've got that, and then I need my pin and my bushing and my bolt, as well as my spring carriage. And I don't know if it'll show up here. But I actually took a marker and I drew this spiral on here to help remind me which way that spring went in. So let me see if this, yeah, there we go. That's my spring carriage, and I've got my pin here. Alright, and so I have to get this bushing inside of there, and there's actually two of these pieces that are bent. I bent them up, and it's just enough room to get that bushing in there. You can see that. Otherwise there's no way to get it in there. They might have actually installed it in there before they welded these tabs on at the factory. But it's not a big deal because I'm going to go around and push those pieces of metal back down. So the bushing's inserted in there. And so, of course, as you put it together, it wants to fall to the bottom. So, I think for starters, I'm going to put my pencil in through the back side here. So then I can just chase this up, this pin, right into the bushing. Okay, so that's inserted. I think I'll go ahead and get my counter torque arm installed. So I've got to pull this back just a little because there's just enough room to get in there. What I'm doing is this hole here where my pinky is, I'm trying to get the shaft lined up so it'll go in there. I have maybe about a 1/4 inch max of room to play with. Okay, so I got my counter torque arm in there. If you notice, it's sticking up too high, and that's because I haven't dropped it down in that slot yet. So you do that by just, you can look down in there and see where that slot is, and once you find it, you just push down and rotate it, and eventually it'll find that slot and drop right in. Just like that, I felt it drop. So the bushing and the spring all has to get lined up here. That looks like it'll be a little bit of fun. So I want to show you this. I've got to make sure that when I get that spring wound in there, that here's my original marks where the ends of the spring was. I've got to come down inside right here through this slot, because as I do, the last part of the spring to go in there is going to be that piece right there, and that needs to hook inside of there. Now the interior of that bushing is not threaded, but the middle of the pin is. Okay, well, I managed to get it. I was able to get that spring down in there and wrapped up around, and I've started the bolt. Let's see if I can get my flashlight on it here. There you go. You see the head of the bolt in there and how I've got it all threaded together down in there. So I'm going to put my nut driver on it and finish tightening it down, and you can see then with the nut driver, so I'm going to get that tightened on there, and you should be able to see the bolt head down in there now, and that one bolt tightens the end of the spring to the bushing and locks it into the counter torque arm up, and it's no longer hooked to the center pin. But what is providing my counter torque now is I've got a screwdriver sitting here under this piece of metal and resting on there, and if you notice, I can just turn my vice grips, and very easily you can see now I'm winding the spring. It actually wants to go on its own. I went ahead and clamped the vice grip on the anti-torque because when it drops down, it keeps locking to the pin, and I want it free. So I just clamp that on there and it holds it up. It can't really go too far either way. And so now I'm just going to start the process of winding. I'm going to grease both sides and just wind it up a little at a time. I'm just using some garage door lubricant. It used to be white lithium, it's not, but it's kind of a generic lubricant that will work for this application. can see here, as I'm winding it up, I've got that screwdriver in there to hold the carriage stationary. That's where that lip of that spring, it has to go under here. All right, I've got a screwdriver there, an anti-torque, and I've got my chisel down in there, kind of beating it up in there, but it's the best I can do at the moment. And we can see by having that chisel in there, it allowed the spring to ride on it and a hook on them tabs. I'll take the chisel off so you can see. Put a socket in my vice grip and use it as a mandrel of sorts. I'll just pound right there. You can see how it's putting a dip in those saddles in there so that the cable can ride on them. Alright, you can see in here then the saddles, I call them the saddles, are all curved, and this thing keeps dropping down in the slot, the anti-torque. And there's where that spring hooks over those metal tabs. Alright, I'm working on installing the cable. I bolted this up, but I took it out. The only way to wind this up now is by pulling on it with the cable. So I raised this little piece up, and it's 180 degrees out from where the spring attached. I don't remember where I had it on there, but I don't think it much matters. And I raised this up a little to slide that cable under there. The end of it is like this, where it's got a meshed ferrule on it. Except this end you can see is flat. So I've shoved that under there. And I'm going to draw it through, and I remember it was more over in the middle. So once that is there, then I take my cable and go, I'll have to think on this, which way it goes around, then this end slips through there. And the cable just rides on top. What I've done here is I shoved the cable down in there, and when the loop came out over here, I got the screwdriver in it and lifted it up, and I've shoved it through here. You have to make sure that you keep the cable on the spool. You don't want to let it run off sides, because it'll get wound up in the shaft. Actually, since I have my counter torque removed, I can just wind the cable by spinning the whole carriage backwards. That's nice. I've got the cable wound up on there. So now what I have to do is find where the counter torque locks in, and that way as I pull on this, it'll start winding the spring up. Torque arm in the slot, which in effect holds the center of the spring stationary. We now start having springlet. I pull on that. I got the torque arm fastened, the cable wound, and so when you pull on this spring, you can feel it's wanting to wind up. But since I've got this tail sticking up here, I may need to do one more wrap of cable to get preload on it, which I'll do by pulling it out, locking the center wheel, and then bringing it around and then putting a screwdriver on it just to hold it till I get it secured to the saw. That should be enough preload for the saw. In order to make a tool to hold the cable out, I took this piece of dunnage board from here at work. And what I did is I put here in a radial arm saw, and I cut a slit down the middle that way, measured and flipped, cut back. Because of the radius of the blade, it actually leaves a little bit of a crown in the middle, but I'll just finish that off with a hand saw. Anyway, I've got a slit for my cable to run through, and when I was done cutting the slit, then here's my gizmo I made where I thought for holding the cable, so I can go ahead and fasten this to the saw. And then what I did is I just took that piece of dunnage and I got a flat washer that I knew that this ferrule wouldn't go through the hole, and I just cut a notch then. It's not very straight because my hacksaw's got a bent blade, but I cut that hole, and so then I just pulled this up with my hand, and was able to put that on it. Box installed. I've got the cable installed here. It's not perfectly straight, but I can adjust that. So with the weight of the saw on there, I'm just take my hand and push down here, and then when I do that, you can see it loosens that. That's all I need, because now I can just slip that out and slip my washer off, and so there it's back on, and we can test and see if it works. Works real smooth. Works smoother than it ever did before. You need to make sure that you have enough preload on that spring that it wants to suck that cable up in there. Now when I initially put it together, the cable was hanging out right there. Well, that's no good, because what that means is if you push the saw up past that, the retractor is done winding and the cable will loosen and jump off the pulley. So it looks like the preset on this particular model, and mind you this is an H4 saw, is one extra turn around just to create enough preload, and the balance feels real good. That's the best we've ever had. You want it so it takes just a little bit of downforce at the saw. Kind of wants to come up, but you have to encourage it. So there we go. I can take this back off and put the shoe back on it and install it and put it back in. Show you how I'm going to put that shoe on there with this leverage on this. You can just take it and fold it over the side. You can get the shoe back on, and then you can just tip this carefully back over, and it'll stay on there. So that's a real handy tool that you can make for yourself. It makes this process a lot safer. And this is all I did, is I just folded that over, and you can see I can just set the shoe right on there, and that comes over and it just locks her in. So now I'll take my vice grips and just bend these over, and then finish taking a hammer and really locking them down good. Once you get them started over center, let me see if I can show you that. There we go. You get that down and bent, and once you get it over so far, then you get it to where when you tap on it with a hammer, it'll lock down. If it's flared out this way, you pound on it, you might jam it and crinkle it and fold the tabs out the other way.